this computer. All right, I am recording now, guys, with 21 students or so, 20, because the other one is me. All right, so let's get this going. Okay, guys, if you remember, we are talking about three different issues at the same time: agriculture, which we covered already; human resources development, which we are going to be covering today; and the third is labor markets in Latin America. And I explained last week that these three are closely linked, and this is why we need to look at them together. So let's move on to human resource development. If you took or will take my economic development class, we are going to learn, or we saw there, that education typically is the main component of what people and economists call human capital. But education is not the only one. We also need to think about the second dimension of human capital, which is health. And health and education, they reinforce each other and they potentiate each other. And I don't want to make a big deal out of this, but I just want to make sure that you keep in mind that when I talk about human resource development in the context of Latin America, although I specifically address education, in the back of my mind, and it should be in the back of your minds too, health should be playing a major role too. And the reason I want to say this is because, you know, many people in Latin America, including some scholars, politicians, intellectuals, they consider education as the silver bullet to eliminate poverty, to, you know, get economic development going once and for all. And I'm not denying that education is a key element. All I am saying is that education is not the only missing ingredient in this effort. You know, to formalize this a bit better, you may think of education as a necessary but not a sufficient condition for economic development. So, okay, yes, education is extremely important. Education is one of the most important ingredients in this process, but it's not the only one. So just keep those things in mind. And let me get going, all right? So education, yes, is seen as the key to promote equitable, sustainable growth in Latin America, the key to economic development. Why? Well, because when you increase the level of education, you know, from high school to college to master's degree and so forth, the productivity of whoever is acquiring this education is going up. And there is a very clear correlation between productivity and real wages. So think about this chain of events. You increase your level of education, then your level of productivity increases. Therefore, you should experience a match in terms of real wages. So in other words, education is going to basically guarantee, or in theory at least, that you are going to be making a higher level of income, right? So this is just on the purely economic sense of standard labor theory, labor economics theory. But there is many other things that go beyond just the pure direct link into economics. And this is why we need to talk about this in terms of political economy, because education can produce other benefits that are not necessarily linked to productivity, enhanced income, or other things that we typically discuss in econ. So I'm talking about things like this. Let me highlight this arrow here. In principle, when you have a more educated population, a more educated workforce, they are more capable to participate in a more effective, intelligent, informed way in democratic decision making. So more, you know, again, in principle, it's going to be more challenging to manipulate through TV, social media. It's going to be more difficult to fool people if they have a better understanding of what's going on in terms of politics, in terms of the environment, in terms of economics, and all of these things. So in fact, in a very cynical way sometimes people think of the importance of keeping your population uneducated, illiterate, because if they don't have education, if they are illiterate, they are way easier to convince, to manipulate, to take them wherever you want to take them, right? Again, I don't espouse that idea, but you know, some people believe that that's actually the case. I tend to think the opposite. Yeah, more educated people are going to be able to produce better arguments, much sharpened critical thinking skills are going to be able to produce a cleaner, better democratic system, right? In any country, including Latin America. But also, when you think about higher levels of education, people in these countries are going to be able to make better decisions in terms of health, in terms of family planning. You know, I don't know if you know this, but although things are changing, Latin America for the last, 20, 30, perhaps 40 years has had very high fertility rates. And this is why the population in Latin America today is still very young compared to the US or Europe, certainly, right? So education improves your health decisions, family planning, and many other important things that are part of your well-being. Of course, this is also important for the environment, from littering, from understanding the whole environmental sustainability in the environment process that is very important. Well, has been always very important, but for many reasons has been put at the forefront in recent years. So anyway, I am not trying to diminish the importance of education. All I'm saying is that it's important to understand that although education is a necessary condition, is not sufficient. And I'm going to make the case as what does that mean? Okay, what else do we need for education to kick in, to actually work? So, all right, I'm going to get there. Okay, now the second section of this introductory page has to do with, okay, what's going on with education in Latin America? Well, there are many ways to tackle this, but one or two important ways to enter into this question are the following. For the last 2-3 generations, the decision makers have been focusing on access. They have been using resources to increase the quantity of education offered. So they think, okay, we need to penetrate, and of course, that makes sense. We need to make sure that as many children in Latin American countries have access to education. And that, again, makes sense. Rural areas, urban areas, and all that is great. The problem so far has been that while quantity is going up, access has improved, the quality of education has not. I grew up in Mexico. I went actually all the way to college in Mexico. So fortunately, I was lucky to get a scholarship at the high school level. So I went to a private high school and also to a private college. But my first few years of education were in the public system. So I can tell you firsthand, at least when I was growing up, that the quality of public education at least in Mexico is not what you would like to see. Not only because you had deficiencies in terms of the facilities, broken blackboards, broken chairs, broken windows, and I'm talking about the city. If you go to the countryside, there is a school, but in many cases, they don't have enough seats, enough materials, enough that. Okay, that's for the facilities. But more importantly, the quality of the instructors. Many of the teachers are poorly trained. They don't have the pedagogical and the teaching skills necessary or the understanding of the subject matter sometimes to be able to teach efficiently to the students. I think I mentioned the other day that I took 3 years of English when I was going through middle school, and I learned nothing. I mean, I remember a few words here and there, but it was pretty much a waste of time. And I can say something similar in other areas like biology, chemistry, and others. But anyway, the point is that quality has suffered. And the other problem with education is that there is this culture in Latin America that encourages repetition and dropping. So in the mind of many people in Latin America, for some reason, rather than figuring out ways to improve learning so that you improve your grades and you move on to the next one, they say, well, repeat the year. Take this entire program once again. So you don't get promoted, you just get into this cycle of repetition and repetition until you finally said, you know what, I'm done, and you drop. And here is another issue that I already mentioned, which is linking these last two arrows. Over the last 2 or 3 generations in Latin America, policymakers have emphasized the importance of preparing the workforce for international competition, globalization, and all of this is great, so that they have channeled a significant amount of resources to really good universities. In Mexico, you have UNAM, the National Autonomous University. In Brazil, in Argentina, in Chile, in Peru, all of these countries have really awesome universities. Let me finish this sentence, Cody, and I'll get back to you. So the problem with that is that they are taking away resources away from the K through 12 system. So the universities are receiving all this attention and all of these resources, and in a way, they are abandoning lower grades, primary, secondary, or what you could say, elementary, middle, and high school. And the problem with that is that in the public system, I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, since you don't have a high quality education, your chances of landing a spot at one of those super awesome free universities in Latin America is very difficult, because you are competing with the kids that went to the private sector, private education sector, and therefore they have a much better education. And when there is the admission exam, well, most of the kids that went to the private sector land these really competitive spots in these awesome universities. And some of these universities compete with, European universities, certainly American universities. You see them at conferences all over the world, and they are great, but very few people have access to that. Cody, you have a question, please go ahead.
Yeah, so the exclusion that you noted in primary and secondary schools, is that deliberate exclusion to sort of undermine the education system for poor and rural kids? Or is it more just the systems, I don't know if I want to say rigorous, but their idea is that you have to succeed to go forward?
No, I understand your question, Cody. I want to think that this is not on purpose. This is not a deliberate attempt to keep the population of Latin America uneducated or anything like that. It's just that the system has progressed in such a way that is marginalizing those attending public education. Let me read this question on the chat. Let's see, wouldn't that just hurt the university in the long run if the students did not get the education needed for the access to the university? Well, the thing is that you have, I don't know the numbers, quite frankly, but let's suppose that you have 20,000, 30,000 spots at this particular university. You have enough children, enough students coming from the private sector to fill all these seats. So it's not that you are going to have a shortage of students because they don't make the cut. No, they don't have to reduce the admission standards or anything. In fact, hundreds of thousands of students just don't get into college because there is just not enough space. Remember, we are talking about Latin America that has, roughly speaking, 750 million people, most of which are young people, not like Germany that, the population is shrinking, not like the US. Is a very young, vibrant population. So it's a very different place. It's a very different place. So anyway, Cody, going back to your question, I want to think that that's not a strategy to keep the population ignorant or anything like that. I think it's just poor planning, poor understanding, and I don't know, maybe there is some biases among some people. Maybe in some countries you have some elements of that, but as a region, at least in Mexico, I can tell you that I don't think that's the case, Cody. Yeah, good question though, but no, I don't think so. It's just the way things have worked out so far, which unfortunately are not in the best interest of the people that need it the most. All right, so let me give you some numbers. Let me give you some numbers so that you get the idea. Oh, Anton, please go ahead.
Would it just because there's not enough resources to provide more spots?
All right, so
not enough supply to meet the demand.
No. Well, all right. Let me say it this way. The National University of Mexico, just to give you an idea, the size of the university is, roughly speaking, 500,000 students. 500,000. This is equivalent to the entire CSU system here in California. Just one university. Of course, it's the National University, but proportions. So the university right now in Mexico City, it's so big already that, realistically speaking, cannot admit more students already. It's not that you cannot make it bigger. It's just the administration, the management of such a big institution is already reaching its limits. So I don't know, maybe when with technology, now that we have improved the virtual delivery of instruction, that internet penetration is increasing in Latin America, now that faculty are getting better, hopefully teaching online and many other things, maybe because of the physical presence is less of a requirement to be on campus, maybe we are going to be able to extend the high quality of the universities in Latin America to more people, because now the physical constraints are not going to be a constraint anymore. And again, here I'm just speculating. I don't know where the where education, what's the direction of education in Latin America, but certainly here in the US and other places, it is clear that we're expanding access through virtual delivery. Yeah, Cody, go ahead.
So there are a large number of people that can go to college and would want to. They're just not able to. It's kind of what you're saying. I'm trying to reconcile the 2 points about the primary and secondary education being poor, but also the limited space in colleges. So there's a number of poor and rural kids that could go to college, but there's just not space for them, or the system, or is it a combination of the two?
It's a combination of the two.
Gotcha.
It's a combination of the two because there is limited space, but also very high standards for admission.
Okay.
Yeah. Let me give you some numbers so that you understand what we're talking about here. So roughly speaking, in Latin America, the number of years of schooling is 6 years. So think about this. Typically, the average Latin American student kid finishes the elementary school. That's it, average. This is roughly half of that, or what we have in the US, because most of the children here in the US, or I should say young adults in the US, at least finish high school. Now think about that difference. Now, if you compare Latin America with Asia, where, you know, we're talking about 2/3, they typically complete at least 18 years of education, which is college or beyond. So Latin America is way behind, way behind. But not only that, it's not just that the Latin American kids are getting shortchanged by a very limited number of years of schooling, is the quality of the students. Think about this, and let me highlight this on the screen. Close to 80% of low-income students, mostly coming from rural areas, but not necessarily, you can also find some of these students in urban areas, cannot understand written messages after 6 years of schooling. So let me put this into perspective. So imagine that you finish elementary school and your mom leaves you a note saying, I don't know, here is your lunch, don't forget to bring back your plastic container, whatever, and you don't understand, you cannot read that note. You don't understand what's, you know, being advertised on the streets if you just read. You don't understand basic written messages. That is another problem, because when you compare internationally through the years of schooling, okay, maybe Latin America has been making significant efforts, significant improvement from 3 years of schooling to 5 to 6 years of schooling. Oh yes, you know, Latin America is making a lot of progress. Well, not quite, because quantity is not enough. Quality has been lagging significantly in Latin America. And this is, you know, another number. The poorest 20% of the population receives 16% of the total public spending on education. So if you think about Gini coefficient for education, you know, you would expect that in a perfect equality line, the poorest 20% of the population should be receiving 20% of the public spending, but now they are receiving less than 20%. And the richest 20% is receiving not 20, but 24% of public education. Now, why would rich families receive a significantly larger amount of public education expenses when they don't need it? So the point I'm trying to make here is that the distribution of public spending is reversed, or should be reversed. A larger proportion should be spent on the lowest percentage of the poorest percentage of the population, rather than the richest 20% of the population. So some scholars define this as a highly stratified educational system that impedes, reduces social mobility. And here I talk about other problems, you know, that I already mentioned. 20% of all elementary students, almost a third of them, repeat years. So a huge repetition rate. So you don't move on from second to third grade, or from fourth to fifth, if you're not doing well. Rather than figuring out what's wrong with that, they just said, well, take second degree again, or take fourth degree again, 2-3 times. It's crazy, right? It's really crazy. Okay, now let me move on to another element that could be important, because I don't want to make this about money only. There is this non-for-profit, it's called Oxfam. It's a non-for-profit based in the UK that collects lots of statistics about many different things, one of which is education, or educational performance. So they have the EPI. And I don't know if this link still works, but you can actually search for this and you will get a hit. So the point here is that on the screen, let me do this. On the screen, you have two important indicators: the EPI rank and the per capita income. So the first indicator sort of hints at the quality of education. And the second indicator, this one that talks about per capita income, is addressing the amount of money that, well, people are spending in that particular country. So if you look at the difference, you know, let me try to, let me clear this, go to my mouse. And this is the point I'm trying to make. There is not a clear correlation between the per capita income and the EPI index. In other words, there is no clear correlation between the amount of money that you spend on education and the quality of that education. In other words, this simple observation, you know, think about, for example, Cuba. Cuba is ranking 5 in Latin America. And is ranking in terms of education, the quality of education, and is ranking last, almost last. You know, I guess Honduras is last, but really, really low in terms of income because Cuba is a really poor country. I don't know how many of you know this, but if you go to Cuba now, today, you're going to find that most people went to college. Most people know how to read really well. They are very smart. You're going to find a huge amount of attorneys, a huge amount of physicians, a huge amount of people that went to college, right? Even those driving the cabs, even those, you know, working at restaurants or whatever. The level of education in Cuba is really, really high and also of a really good quality. Yet the country is really poor. It's not like the country is spending everything they have on education. No, the point is that it matters how much you spend on education, and also matters how you spend these scarce resources. I don't know if you're making, you're following this, but this is what I'm trying to say. This suggests that educational incomes, this should be outcomes. Educational outcomes are driven by more than simply money. They are also driven by how much is spent and also how is spent. Latin America, give or take a few points here and there, is spending, roughly speaking, 4.5% of GDP, which is not bad. It's actually more or less in line with other developing countries. The problem, once again, is that the vast majority of this 4.5% of GDP is not spread evenly throughout the educational system. Most or a significant amount of this money is going to public universities. And you know, this is you know, an interesting idea. Wealthy Latin American people wanted world-class universities. So this is why, you know, when Cody asked this question about, you know, whether this is a deliberate or it's just the way, a deliberate attempt or just a way of the system has evolved, I want to think that this is just the system has evolved, you know, because, you know, it's kind of a scary thought that just a very few people in Latin America were able to grab power enough to bias public expenditure in education so badly that it's just for their own benefit. I just, you know, refuse to believe that. Maybe I'm naive, maybe I'm wrong, but I guess it's possible. Just go, D.
Yeah, so couldn't it be said that a big role, well, obviously in Cuba, Castro pushed for a large scale literacy program. I guess some people argue it was for political reasons, but either way, it seems to have worked to have educated the population. And in Latin America, there doesn't seem to be a large emphasis placed on education, at least from a government perspective. From what you're saying, it seems like the wealthy place value on education for themselves, but the government either doesn't have the power or isn't allowed by the rich sort of upper class to encourage and develop education for the lower income families and kids that there are.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it is true. Fidel Castro launched a huge literacy program, but this was early on, way early on after the Cuban Revolution. So we're talking about more than 50 years ago, which could have been the foundation for what they have now. I don't know. I am not an expert on that particular area. But the point is that Cuba didn't spend 10% of GDP or 20% of GDP in education, yet they have one of the highest, most literate populations in Latin America today. And that's all the point I was trying to make. Now, regarding the second point, once again, I don't know. I mean, this could be an interesting research project, you know, as to why or how you know, what are the reasons, motivations, political or otherwise, that produce this funneling of resources towards the university system, public university system, rather than, or at a greater scale than other levels of education in Latin America. That would be an interesting project to see, Cody. Let's leave it here. Let's leave it here because I don't know really what's going on. Anyway, another problem in Latin America, and this is perhaps similar to what happens with police forces in Latin America, is that low salaries. The teachers in Latin America, pretty much throughout, I mean, this is not unique to Latin America. I mean, this is happening in the US, all throughout the world. Teachers, teaching is not going to make you rich, for sure, right? So the few people that are in education are do this because we love to teach. We have, I don't know, a different type of satisfaction that is not monetary. Anyway, but the point is that in Latin America, relatively speaking, teachers receive a really low salary. And when that happens, it's very difficult to attract enough talent to recruit those people with the skills, the ability, the call, the talent to you know, to teach other kids. And that's a problem. That's a problem because when you have a place with very scarce resources to like Latin America, attracting talent with money is a challenge. Now, I don't know how many of you know this, and we're going to talk about this later, I believe, but the teachers union in Mexico is the largest union in Latin America, and perhaps one of the most powerful forces in terms of politics in Latin America. However, unfortunately, and I am, you know, don't get me wrong, I belong to the union here at the university, you know, normally I would say, okay, I'm pro-union and all that stuff, but sometimes unions don't perform the way they are supposed to, like many other institutions, not just the union, but any institution, they misperform or underperform or perform badly. Well, get this, the one of the most powerful unions in Latin America, the Mexican Teachers Union, just, I don't know, 10 years ago, it was discovered that the leader was misusing the funds. This lady, some of you with some knowledge of this in Mexico, I'm talking about a lady by the name of Elba Esther Gordillo. Elba Esther Gordillo. They discovered that she was basically misusing money, mischanneling money. She had a home here in La Jolla in San Diego. She flew in a helicopter, like, you know, as many times as you want. I mean, the leader of that union, very corrupt, very, not very honest, right? So she was in jail for years. They put her in jail, and just recently, I think she is now under house arrest, and they are talking about the possibility of letting her go free again. I don't know, I cannot explain how this is happening. And the only point I'm trying to make is that, at least in the case of Mexico, unfortunately, some of the institutions that were supposed to be able, or were supposed to be fighting, and were supposed to be, you know, really on the side of the students and on the side of the teachers and on the side of education, fail, or at least have failed for a while in the case of Mexico. And again, this is just to add one more layer of complexity, you know. And finally, another problem for Latin America and Mexico is particularly in rural areas, and this is combined with the health part of human capital. You know, it is very difficult to go to school and take advantage of the lecture when you are hungry, or when you have a parasitic disease, so that even if you eat, you don't take advantage of the nutrients of the food, or if you have a toothache, or if you don't have glasses to read. It's just, you know, I can go on and on and on and on, and all of these challenges that have to do with health impediments to take advantage of education. So in rural areas, in addition to the problems with the classroom, the quality of the teachers, the missing, you know, materials, and all of these things, you have many students not showing up to class because they are ill, or when they come, they are hungry, they are ill. It's just a really, really difficult situation that is limiting the educational success of many. I'm talking about millions of children in Latin America, not just a few. I'm talking about lots of them in really, really difficult situations, guys. All right. So here I'm trying to more or less give you a sense, since this is an econ class, a sense of what's happening on the supply side of education and on the demand side of education. This is not meant to be exhaustive, but at least I hope it's going to give you some tools to frame the issue in terms that, you know, most econ people would do. So on the demand side, here is a huge problem. For many poor people, low-income families, education is seen as a luxury. Like, what do you mean, professor? Yes, the opportunity cost of going to school is very high. Because when you think about household income, not just the head of the family, whether it's mom or dad or both, but you think about the combined income necessary for survival, the survival of the household. It implies that not just mom or dad or both work. They need sometimes 2, 3, 4 of the kids also to work. Otherwise, they don't have enough food, they don't have enough shelter, medicine to survive. So going to school represents a very high opportunity cost, because the income lost when not working because you are at school is very significant for the family. You understand that? This is really important, and many people in Latin America don't, well, I guess many people do understand, but has not been addressed yet. The other problem dealing with the demand side is that when there is a crisis, and you know, we just went through, well, the pandemic, which is terrible. Previous to that, 2007, 2009, we have the housing crisis. Oh, another huge economic crisis. But believe me, the crisis that we suffer in countries like the US, rich, developed nations, pale in comparison with the economic crisis that poor countries go through, including Latin America, right? So when there is an economic crisis, and there have been many in Latin America, in Bolivia, in Mexico, Peru, all of them. Actually, there is, as far as I can tell, no country in Latin America has escaped a major, at least one major economic crisis. Some of them have had 2, 3, 4, 5, Some of them are going through a crisis right now. When that happens, people drop off from school. The ones that are hanging on, okay, I need to go to school, I need my education, they have to drop off of school. And this is the point, when the economy recovers, when things start to get better, they typically don't go back. Because many reasons, they lose their seat, or they actually discover that, they can make some money to help their families, or many other reasons. The point is that the return to school is very limited, even after the crisis is over. Anyway, that's on the demand side. On the supply side, you have already talked about this: biased public spending, bureaucratic, politicized decision-making that is channeling most of the money to universities rather than the rest of the school. And of course, most of Latin American countries are not spending enough on education. The GDP, the percentage of GDP spent on education is high, but could be higher given the importance of education for development. The educational systems in Latin America don't have really good mechanisms of control and accountability. So, for example, here in the US, we have teachers evaluation. So you guys are going to be rating me. And if a faculty member is not doing a good job, we can, try to remedy the situation. And eventually the remedy includes dismissal. In Latin America, the union is so powerful that, believe it or not, there have been some cases in Mexico where if you have a post at a teaching university or in a good post, you can inherit this to your children. What doesn't make any sense? Yeah, even if your child doesn't have any inclination to teach, any desire or ability to teach, you can pass on, you can give it to your children, which, think about this. This doesn't make any sense, right? But it happens. Inadequate pay and preparation for teachers. They are not very well prepared and they are not very well paid. And okay, let me stop here to gather some ideas before I move on, because the next section is a bit long and I can do this later. Anyway, let me stop here. The lecture notes. Any comments, any questions so far?
I have a question. Is Latin America's education system so bad that they would be better off taking videos of the US classroom and some teacher teaching and just play that?
Well, I'll have to think more about that interesting question, David. In principle, you would think that could help, but the challenge is that, most Latin American people, they don't speak English. So,
you'd have them learn English before they start school, and then their entire education is videos of top teachers in the US. Right.
Okay, let's suppose that we do that now children in Latin America can speak and learn and do all that in English. Now, the second problem then is, believe it or not, we take things, so many things here in the US for granted. Internet penetration, access to a computer, access to all of this technology. In many Latin American countries, particularly in rural areas, they just only dream about it. Think about this. Many people in Latin America don't speak Spanish or Portuguese. They live in remote locations that are so far away from civilization that they actually don't have contact with urban areas. And that's why they don't need to speak Spanish. So even if we were able to instruct them in English, even if we were able to grant them computers and internet and all of these things, culturally speaking, the reference points, the framework of education in the rich world is so different from what they are used to. Think about this. Let's suppose that I'm teaching in English to a group of students in a remote area in Bolivia where they have, well, I guess they have to have electricity, otherwise they wouldn't be able to see me. But anyway, I start talking about, I don't know, franchises. Just to give you an example of business, right? We start talking about franchises. What are, they have no reference. I mean, culturally speaking, they are in a whole different era, right? And this is just to give you an idea. So the point I'm trying to make is that, and that's a good point, David. Another challenge is that normally education has to be tailored to the culture, to the traditions, to the history of the locality or the group you're addressing to make sense, to be effective. Does that make sense? Now, if we're talking about technical stuff, you know, you're teaching math, engineering, and other more technical things, this may work at some extent. I don't know, but you know, very few go to STEM fields anyway. You know, we're talking about other fields, you know, that are going to be more challenging to address that way. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Because I just wanted to know your thoughts on it, because it seemed like that could be an interesting idea if you have like lower teachers.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, again, thinking about access, thinking about the taking advantage of technology. No, I see where your mind is going, and I like it. I like it. Yeah, Cody.
Yeah, just to build on what you guys were talking about, I think you made a good point about sort of STEM fields being sort of really hard to do over Zoom and the internet in particular, especially something like engineering. And then another thing I would say about spreading education over the internet is if it was that easy, then there'd be a lot more people in this class, to say the least. I mean, universities, especially in developed countries like the US, aren't gonna, not saying they're gonna intentionally just say, stay out of our classrooms, we don't want you to have this knowledge, but there is some incentive for them to receive compensation for the school and professors for what they go through. So it seems unlikely that if there's caps on like we can't invite all our friends to come to this lecture.
Yeah.
It seems unlikely to be able to not only get through the obstacle of hundreds of millions of people learning English that have a huge language barrier and cultural barrier, but also the idea that universities would just freely offer up this resource that they derive so much revenue from.
Yeah. Let me finish with this because I'm out of time. But something important, guys, for you to understand is that when we talk about public colleges in Mexico, we're talking about, or in Latin America, really, we're talking about 100% free. So the public education, like in the US, like the CSU system, is not really free because you still have to pay what, like 40, 50% or even higher of the tuition. So the state is subsidizing a given percentage of your education, but you still have to pay some. So it's not really free. In the case of Latin American countries, we're talking about truly free education at the university level, right? So for the type of model that we are discussing, perhaps the government could pay, you know, American universities or European universities for the delivery of these materials. So, but again, we're kind of dreaming here. We're taking a hypothetical that you know, it's interesting to consider, but perhaps not very realistic, guys. Yeah. I'm gonna stop the recording.